now because he has multiple places, positions at the university in New York. He's not only professor in electrical engineering, communication engineering, but also computer science and also radiology. So we're talking about multidisciplinarity with different people coming together, but Ted has all of the disciplines inside. So he is himself multidisciplinary. And with him, we have a young scholar, Chowdher, and she received her PhD from Stanford University, working with John Chaffee, and she will be now moving on to work on the Internet of Things, which is something that we will hear more about in the future. So their task here is to present their own view of how ideas came to their minds in their research, and what they think about this session and how we can introduce the work. So, Ted, please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Giovanni. Buongiorno. It's great to be here, and thank you very much, Giovanni, and the Marconi Institute for Creativity, the Un'Industria Bologna, the University di Bologna, and the Fondazione Guglielmo Marconi for this conference. My name is Ted Rappaport. As Giovanni said, I'm on the faculty of New York University, and I'm an electrical and computer engineering professor and also a professor of computer science and in the School of Medicine. And one of the things that Marty Cooper just mentioned, the impact of wireless on healthcare, is one of the reasons why I recently moved to New York University, because of the opportunities to work with a major hospital and doctors to bring that future to become a part of our lives. Sir David Payne, the chairman of the Marconi Society, mentioned in his opening remarks that the Marconi Society was founded by Gioia Marconi Braga. And Gioia founded the Marconi Society to honor the pioneers of telecommunications in memory of her father, Guglielmo Marconi. And we heard about some of the Marconi prize winners of the past, including Arthur C. Clarke, who envisioned geostationary satellites as a science fiction writer before anyone knew that geostationary satellites could exist. Other Marconi prize winners include the founders of Google, Qualcomm, founder of Broadcom, Adobe, inventors of the long-distance fiber optic cable, pioneers of error control coding, and on and on. So Gioia Braga really, in honoring the great Guglielmo Marconi, the creative engineer, established really quite a prize. But what she also did, to her credit, is she also established a Young Innovators Prize, a prize to honor young engineers who are selected before the age of 27, because it was Guglielmo Marconi's long distance across the Atlantic transmission that happened in 1901 before he was 27 years old. So we have amongst us for the next few days some of the past and present Marconi Young Scholar Award winners, and I thought it'd be nice to have them raise their hand right now. Ankasha is one of them, so raise your hand. They're in the room, so I think we should give them a round of applause, because they really are the future innovators. And one of the hopes of the Marconi Society is that in 40 years or so, they will be up giving the kind of talk that Marty Cooper gave us and changing the world as we know it. The topic of this panel is creativity in art, design, and science. And I was very honored to introduce this with Ankasha, because I'm the son of an artist. I'm an engineer, and I'm very not good at art. But I have a daughter who is an artist, so it skipped me and went to my daughter. And my parents were born very young, and he was my father was an art history professor, but before that, he was an art history student. And as a baby, I remember him selling woodcut prints door to door, as he was an undergraduate and then a graduate student, to be able to keep going to college. And he pursued his passion of art It was a struggle. Financially, it was a struggle. And he eventually became a professor and then gave it all up to become an antique dealer, which is really art and very creative. And so he had to learn how to evaluate the value of antiques, how to market antiques, what was in favor, and what is art, and who values art. So you could see the idea of a starving artist. To make it, you really need many different attributes: entrepreneurialism, creativity, how to finance it. There's so many things that go into making something that really makes an impact. And this session is going to look at some of those things. In fact, the whole conference is addressing this. What's the fiber? How do you do it? You know, engineering, which is my field, my primary field, is very mathematical. It's very rigorous in many ways. We teach our students, as Senora Braga mentioned, we teach our students often in boxes with mathematical equations. And these equations are the law, and engineers follow the law. But if you look at something even as fundamental as random processes and stochastics, a fundamental class and theory that all engineers use to define things that are random, you see a remarkable amount of creativity. For example, in the development of the models for the atom and to be able to understand molecular biology and nuclear reactions, you had Einstein developing probabilistic models to describe the motions of atoms with very rigorous math. And then a few years later, you had Heisenberg developing, with the same set of rules, completely new models of math, which the people at the time thought couldn't be possible. It just didn't follow anything that was known. Yet, the creative energy and the insight to try to create something new from this rigid structure allowed a complete new way of analyzing, which led to great breakthroughs. There's a basic theorem I teach my students that shows the creativity of probability. It's called Bergstrom's paradox. Bertram's paradox. Bertram came up with this idea 200 years ago that if you draw a simple circle and put a triangle inside so that the triangle is inscribed by a circle, and you draw a simple chord from one side of the circle to the other, depending on how you define the problem, the probability of that chord being greater than the length of a triangle is either 1/4, 1/2, or 2/3. The answer is determined based on the way you pose the problem. And therein lies the key to creativity, one of the keys, that it's how we define things, how we perceive things from the start that really lead and often provide a new track into coming up with new breakthroughs that weren't thought to be possible before. And we're going to hear about some of those ideas in the session today. So I'll just close my remarks by saying this is a wonderful opportunity for us to delve into what makes creativity adapted, and how do you change the world through it. I think a lot of it is passion. A lot of it is entrepreneurial skills. But I'm hoping to take away some other insights from the many great speakers we have here. And I'm particularly excited to meet the Marconi, the Barron Young Scholars provided through scholarships that Paul Barron gave to the Marconi Society. And Ankasha Chowdher is one of those. So Ankasha, what's your view on creativity in art, design, and science?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Ted, for the amazing introduction. It's a pleasure to be part of such a great crowd and this debate on creativity in art, design, and science. I'll give my engineering perspective, but I'm hoping to take away a lot from the art and design, as well as the engineers, the amazing pioneers in the field here. So when I looked at the program, not only was I excited, I was really curious. My question was that if we can analyze creative thinking, if we can make it a scientific method, can we realize the science fiction of programming machines to be creative? Can you imagine a computer which can, say, paint, draw, make sculptures that you've been viewing around, make architecture like you've been seeing in the city? And you've probably seen iRobot, where machines can create other machines, So can we do that? And while I will let the speakers answer that question as they analyze creative thinking, my understanding of creative thinking from my research experience was that you generally progress from the stage of inspiration to epiphany, where you come up with this great solution, right? In the inspiration stage, you are looking for an idea. That idea can come from something very basic. Newton saw an apple fall from the tree. Or you saw something amazing, which is a gap in knowledge of what we know. So Martin just talked about car phones and not being mobile enough, or science fiction or vision of some sort. Wynn talks about interplanetary communications. So that's a great vision to have, like Star Trek, you know? The planets can talk to each other. When you go from the idea stage to really making things possible, both scientists and artists, and I can say that from personal experience, having gone through a PhD, you have hours of drudgery where nothing seems to be working. You want things to work, but nothing works. There's a lot of frustration. But how do you arrive at the creative moment when things happen, when things align and you just have the thing working? For Marconi, that would be the radio transmission that happened across 2 continents, across the ocean. How does that happen? And that's where the creativity happens. So how do you program a machine, being an engineer, to reach that uncertain point, which is not defined well enough, and say something beautiful has been created? And that is really a challenge today, but maybe as engineers we can solve it if we can understand creative thinking really well. So that was my first question around the conference, and I'm hoping to take away insights, maybe program such a machine for the future. The second question that I wanted to bring up as food for thought for all of you was that, and Ted already mentioned this, and speakers earlier today also mentioned this, how do we create pedagogical techniques that can make the next generation of students creative? From science and engineering, we often teach mathematical equations, and students often sitting in the classroom see this as the drudgery of facts. They'll go through this, give the exam, and forget it. But how do you make them think beyond what they're being taught? And as a student, I would say maybe the answers lie in helping them connect this with what do they do in their real life. Maybe see the whole process as what they do in their real life. And one example here that I would like to give from personal experience is that somewhere learning the science, my mother is a chemistry professor. So somewhere learning science, I started seeing science and what I do in my daily life together. And I often hack the gourmet food that I eat outside. So I'm hoping, I was in France earlier this week, so I was trying to figure out the recipes for desserts that I ate. And I'm hoping to hack some of the recipes that I eat here for pastas. But in general, if you relate what you do in your daily life with what you do as a science process, it's the chemistry there and what you do in your kitchen often aligns. So just that connection often helps students understand. So are there answers there in how we can help students to be creative? Or do the answers lie in intersections of art and science? Maybe we can create science galleries where students can just go and look at microscopes and models of airplanes and get creative there. Or maybe labs of art, you know, where they can play with colors and recreate some of the art pieces. So I'll close off my remarks on those 2 questions about the food for thought, hopefully getting our distinguished panel of researchers to answer that and learn more about creativity. Thank you so much. This is a pleasure.
Thanks to Ted and Akansha. This is an excellent introduction. They brought up some of the focal points for our discussion. First of all, Ted underlined the importance of random events, not only mathematical modeling of that, but the fact that if you look at the history of science, technology, and art, every time you have something that was unexpected coming into the process, and from there something really new came about. The importance of something which is unexpected. And the second thing that Ted said is focus. How do you focus on a problem? How do you define the problem? How that shapes the way you approach that. Now we're talking about artificial creativity. Let's talk about human beings here, but yes, machines can also be creative. There are some patents out there of creative machines. Let's not give that away. Let's keep it for the human side. But it's possible also for machines to be creative. And how do you train the young generations to be creative? Let's leave it there because time is really running. So we'll start with the first speaker, and we'll see how these questions will be taken up. So we start off with Todd Lubart. Todd, please take the podium. He comes from the University of Paris Descartes, professor of psychology there, and also director of the LATI laboratory, which is, has one of his topics is really creativity. He's been working in this field for 20, 25 years. And his speech is entitled Creative Processes, Art, Design, and Science, so it's really perfect for the session. Please, Todd, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Okay, well, okay, so happy to be here. And we have a large number of studies going on in our laboratory with different colleagues, some who are here, about various aspects. But I'm going to talk in particular about the creative process in a few different domains. And this work, in addition to Marion Bottella, has been conducted with several different colleagues who I just would like to highlight here. So coming from psychology, when we talk about creativity, our first approach to define it is that we're interested in an ability to produce work that's both novel, original, and appropriate, useful, adaptive in its context. Now, to produce this work obviously involves some different steps. You don't just click your fingers and the work appears. And that's what we call the creative process, that sequence of thoughts and actions that leads eventually, in the best cases, to something that's highly original, highly useful, impacting society in the largest sense. You might recognize that photo up there. That's Henri Poincaré, famous mathematician, who had a habit of writing down as he discovered mathematical ideas and invented different mathematical theorems, how he got his ideas. And so based on his own personal introspective accounts, we have some of the first notions about what is this thing called the creative process. I have to say that we mentioned often, several people already mentioned often the idea of the box and how we put people in boxes, et cetera. We got to think out of the box. Well, in creativity research, we have our own little boxes. One of them is the creative process, and it's a particularly black box because we don't know what is going on in that box. And so I'm going to try to shed some light on that and unpack the stuff in the box. And so Henri Poincaré, his first approach was to tell us that he started with conscious work at his desk. Then he did other things. He had incubation going on in his head. Then the idea came, illumination, and finally he had to work out the details and verify that idea. And this was the steps of his so-called creative process. Well, we've been doing work on the creative process in different fields, partly artistic, partly design, partly literary creation, partly musical composition, and partly science or engineering, inventive creativity. And we're interested in whether that so-called creative process has similarities across these domains, differences across these domains, what's going on, really. And so we've been conducting, I'm going to talk today about something we call the CREA Pro project. It's a multi-site project that's been going on for the last 4 years and about creative processes. And in the first stage of this project, we went to recognize certified creative people in different domains. For example, designers, industrial designers, for example, artists, inventor, engineer types. And we interviewed them to get how they talk about the creative process and to give us examples of when they had that special moment and what happened to them. And so we had, based on these, we also asked these people what kind of thoughts, what kind of emotions, what kind of personality characteristics seem to accompany the creative process in your own field. And one thing we did was to analyze the content of what they said with text analysis techniques, and we came up with various kinds of things you talk about when you talk about the creative process in each domain. So it's the vocabulary, it's the mental model of what these people mean by the creative process. And what you see here is, for example, a designer said, I take one step, I don't work in one step, I don't draw, then make a 3D version, then make a model. It's all mixed together and I go back and forth between drawings and modeling, okay? Anyway, when you analyze all the words that are used in the design domain, for example, you come up with major categories where words seem to cluster, and you get what we call the universe of discourse about the creative process in these different fields. And there are similarities, and sometimes different fields use different terms for the same kind of concept. When you ask people in these fields what are the most important things in your creative process, here's a result for the design field. And so the top 10 most important things of the creative process for designers, according to our experts, was, for example, different kinds of openness to aesthetics, to new experiences, to new ideas, to dreams, but also self-criticism. Your first idea is not necessarily your best. Also, what we call problem definition, flexibility, motivation, divergent thinking. And so these kinds of things, we have these top 10 for different fields, and there's some similarities, but there's some differences, suggesting that the creative process is not really one unique thing, okay? Here's a result of a macro-theoretical analysis, in particular accomplished by one of our colleagues here present today, Vlad Glavineau, who will talk another day, but he's here with us. And when he was over collaborating on this study, so it led to, for designers, but we have it for the other fields, a kind of macro view of how these people conceptualize their creative process. So for example, they start out with an order, a problem, a client who wants something done. It leads to a general idea, they document, they do some first sketches, they perfect, they prototype. But what's interesting is that this creative process is not some kind of isolated sequence that they push a button and do, because there are obstacles that come into play. There are social environmental factors like the client or colleagues, which come into play at certain steps in a design creative process. There are emotions that come into play in the design creative process at certain moments. And so we get a kind, what we call multivariate, several layers, emotional, personality, motivational, cognitive, which are all interplaying in the act of creation. And we try to distinguish these levels of mental activity and take them apart. In the main kind of study I'm going to present to you today, we went to, after we had initially looked at how people talk about this, creators in different fields, we developed a notebook where students in these fields, advanced students in art, design, engineering, and so forth, could follow along as they create at each step in a main project in their real school study, projects that went between 4 to 12 weeks long in their curriculum, and they would monitor how they were thinking, what they were feeling as they worked. Afterwards, they produced a range of productions, and we had judges evaluate the more and less creative productions. So we had some individual differences in the outcomes. And so we had these diaries, these notebooks, 8 to 12 weeks of work in different fields. And what you see up there in French is some of the things that a student could check off at each moment when they filled in their diary. So they could engage in multiple aspects of the creative process. They didn't have to say, today I asked myself questions. They didn't have to say, today I did this, I did that. They could do many things at the same time, because the idea is the creative process is perhaps a interplay of many kinds of sub-processes. This is just an example of the design task. They had to produce a poster for an exposition about ecological packaging, back to our famous box, okay? Now, the writing students had to produce a screenplay for a movie. The composing students had to compose a composition musically. And the engineering students had to invent a kitchen with certain specifications for a new camping car. Okay, this is the art students. This is some of their diaries. So they made sketches, they wrote free comments, and they filled in that questionnaire at each step. Here's one of the productions that an art student did as their course project. Here's another production that one of those students did. These you could compare to many productions, which you don't see, and appreciate the more or less creative result. Okay. What we do is we try to trace the steps of creative process that these art students tend to take as they go through their work. And so at each step, we have a photo of what these students say they're up to in their process. And we try to trace what they move from one step to the next step. And so this is a sort of sequencing diagram, okay, of how they move along from activity to activity in their creative process. And what you see attached to some of these steps is the kinds of emotions, kinds of personality states, or kinds of thinking that they associate often with that step. This is a general diagram for art students doing their artistic sculpture project, okay? We have other ones like it for the other fields, and we can compare them and contrast. However, what's even perhaps more interesting, in my opinion, is to separate the diagram for the art students who were the most successfully creative from those who were the least successfully creative. And so from that group of 25 art students, we pull out the top and the bottom, and we compare the sequence of their processing to see if there was something different in what they did. That would be the holy grail of the creative process, in my opinion. Okay, so we took the 7 top art students who have 17 or 18 out of 20 as their score, which in France is an extremely exceptional Picasso-level event, okay? And we have the 5 art students who are the low of the low with 11 out of 20 as a score, which means they're eking by, passing in a less than honorable way this art course, okay? And so here is the pattern of transitions from state to state for those C+, those high creatives, okay? I don't expect that you're going to totally photograph what this is, but I want you to compare it visually with the next diagram I'm going to show you right now, which is the C-. Do you notice that the arrows, the states are the same, the boxes are the same, but the arrows are a little bit different. There's a lot of running around, as we say, chicken with his head cut off, for the C- group. And this is characteristic in all fields. What's different from field to field is that which arrows connect one sub-state of creative thinking to another is a characteristic of each field. But the C- are always more densely running around in all directions. Here's another little result. In terms of transitions, if you take the define the problem sub-step, the C+, when they define the problem, they tend next to move to documentation phase. Whereas the C-, they tend to define the problem, and then they start trying things in the sculpture studio right away. is just start to try stuff, okay? Experimenting in art is trying, okay? Psychological characteristics associated with experimenting as a phase. The C+, the high creatives, they're in a positive mood, and they find it very motivational in that phase. The C-, they find that phase to be most stressful and full of doubt and frustration. So they experience that step of experimenting very differently. That's just an example of one little result from this project. Here, I'm going to give you a result from the engineering student group. So the engineering students are inventing a great new kitchen to go in a future camping car. And they had 10 sessions of work, 10 weeks of work on this. And so if you look at the high and low creative groups, the high creative are in green, and the low creatives are in blue. And we have our different processes at each step. And visually, you can see that the graph on the first 5 sessions, the two groups are kind of similar in how much they visit each sub-process. But on the right-hand side, closer to me, you see that some of those sub-processes in the later part of the creative process are more visited by the high creatives than the low. And vice versa. A few steps are more visited by the low creatives than the high. And so those are significant differences in many cases. I won't get into the details. But we try to separate out what's going on and what's the special grain of creative process that leads to the big idea. I'll finish up in a moment now, because I'm just on my conclusion slide. So what I wanted to try to expose to you today is that we are trying to look at this creative process from a multivariate view, look at the layers of cognition, emotion, personality, and habits of how people like to work. We find that there's qualitative and quantitative differences between the high and the low creative people, those who end their process, and at the end we know at the end who was more creative than another. We can actually detect as they go through their process and predict what's going to be the result, which means ultimately that if you want to educate for creativity, you can intervene in a somewhat specific way at certain moments in the creative work and reorient a student, perhaps helping them to restructure their working pattern. And so we do some creativity training studies, which is a little bit like, hopefully, the medicine of the future, so that we can individually target where a student is starting to go down a path which is probabilistically likely to lead to a perhaps low creative, perhaps a dead end, and perhaps help those students to see better how to maneuver in their creative work. That's it.
Thank you, Todd. We have time for 2 questions. Please, Vint.
I don't know if we need a microphone. Yes. I'm interested to know. This is easy. So there we go. I got it. Oh, you want to do that one too? All right. So the question is, how do you decide that something was more creative than something else? What's the metric?
Okay, we have a panel of people who know the field. We show them the diverse productions, and they rate these productions one against the other. We tend to find that you do achieve a respectable level of interjudge agreement, and plus these are not all rated against Picasso and other great artists. In this case, they're rated against each other. So there's definitely the more and the less creative. And so this is a part of the social nature of the creative work.
Only a critical point. The assessment and seeing the value is a very critical point. There's another question, please, from the floor.
Thank you, Todd, for a very interesting talk. Andre Walton, University of Nevada, Reno. When we were looking at your slide that showed the connected boxes and the difference between the high creatives and the lower creatives, the running around with the head cut off slide, did you attribute that to a sense of a reduction in self-confidence compared to the clearer paths in the more creatives?
We don't have the necessary data to answer that specifically. However, I believe that the less creative group has perhaps less of a vision, perhaps a little bit, in fact, if you compare it to certain other fields in terms of intellectual performance in non-creative tasks, for example, solving complex problems of mazes and so forth, you do tend to find that the high performance people, they go through a more direct path with, and it's a little bit more perhaps planned from the beginning. And the less successful in those other intellectual tasks do tend to explore the mazes in all directions, running around. And so I think that there is something that's not necessarily, maybe it's linked to confidence, but I think that there's also an aspect that's rather more the fundamental approach to creative work that these different people have more or less gained in their life history. Mm-hmm.
Okay, thanks again. We will leave the other questions to the break, and please join me again in giving a round of applause to Todd. We move on to the second presentation, which is by the University of Coventry, by Journeaux. She's a professor of fine art education, 30 years experience in teaching and management in art and design. And also Judith Mottram, professor of visual arts at Coventry again. A doctoral study in the 80s looked at the influences of change on the work of young painters, involved in managing research and doctoral education in art and design for 20 years. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good morning. Is that on? Yes.
Turn on. Right. This is the more difficult part.
It's the most difficult thing to get this on. Good morning, everybody. I'm Jill Journeaux. This is Judith Mottram. And the key motivation behind this piece of work that we've done was the awareness of changes in approaches to fine art education and conceptions of curriculum at HE level. Really, we were trying to see, could we find the wood in the trees, as the image suggests, and look in that black box that Todd's just described as the creative process of the training of young artists. Both Judith and I have held senior management posts, been deans within the UK system, so we have a very broad overview of provision in our area. And Judith was one of the first PhDs in the fine art field in the 1980s and has been more involved than I have in the research in the field. I've tended to concentrate on teaching and learning. Neither of us are in management jobs now, and we're working together in the same institution on topics of shared interest. So a little bit of background. Obviously, one of the issues in the context is the changing nature of contemporary art. We've got a house of cards image there. Is it a house of cards? There's the impact of new technology, global distributions of the image, and the globalized art market. There's also the continuing influence and quite difficult area of the Duchampian ready-made option in our field. This is an art object because I declare it to be. I am an artist because I declare myself to be so. And this has all led to a move away from traditional disciplines, which underpin teaching in the fine arts for over 400 years. Judith recounted in a paper that she wrote in 2001 called Art Practice and Academic Responsibility that when she came back into higher education from working in the gallery system, where she'd been on management training courses, which introduced her to contemporary creativity theories, that she was surprised to see no awareness of creativity literature within the art school. we have to say that's pretty much still the case, but it is coming through and beginning to emerge in some areas of research, particularly around the nature of what constitutes a practice. Other parts of the context that need mentioning are the larger student numbers, which have required new models of delivery and made the project, which for a substantial period of time was a key vehicle for learning in fine art, more expensive and difficult to operate. Student-led learning, the issue of student versus curriculum, is particularly relevant to art students, where staff tend to want to tailor what they're teaching to the individual that is learning. There's also, alongside that, the bigger context of a centralisation of quality assurance systems, the use of metrics within the UK system, and a move towards a generic education speak, which is not discipline reflective, has a life of its own. And also the bigger political picture around the notion of the creative industries, which began really in the mid-1990s, but was formalised in Ken Robinson's All Our Futures report in 1999. And it's resulted in a mythology around creative disciplines, creativity, and also is being linked to the idea that creativity makes you happy.
So, okay, I mean, the things which struck me when I came back into education and looking at the creativity literature really was the notion of time spent in the field. The Csikszentmihalyi's 10,000 hours. It was interesting that back in 1997, when the creativity book first came out, it really wasn't known. It's only in the last couple of years that we've had general reporting in the UK about Csikszentmihalyi's ideas. The other thing which I really felt resonated with, struck me, was the notion of the set of conditions, the conditions for creativity. That had matched what I experienced as a student and what I was intuitively delivering to mine. And then we also have looked at the Amabile more recently, and we'll come back to that later, thinking about the necessary and sufficient components for creative production. So what we actually did, our initial expectation when we were preparing for this conference was that we'd look at project briefs. These are the things which the teacher uses in the art studio to actually shape the coursework. We haven't yet found the number of project briefs we expected, but are going to go back and look at some of the archives held at the Tate Gallery and other major resources later. But what we did find, we have worked from 9 project briefs and 1 handbook, dating from the 1980s to current material. We decided to fill the gap by doing some interviews, a purposeful selection of people teaching a period between 1970 and 2010 or so. So 4 expert teachers with 35 to 40 years in the field. We looked at a range of literature in the field, from Ruskin's Lectures on Art through to James Elkin's Why Art Cannot Be Taught, which is a seminal book at the moment in our field. Now, he highlights a lot of the contradictions which can be summarized in the following quote. Art teachers and students are in a bind. They do not teach or learn art, but they also cannot talk too much about the fact that they do not teach or learn art. And surprisingly, volumes such as Issues in Art and Education and Artists in the 1990s, Their Education and Values, offer little useful material. So I'll start with a brief look at how we approached the material that we found. So here are a couple of the examples of project briefs that were given to students. And Jill and I both undertook a sort of an exercise of looking at the material and seeing what we felt was really quite important. I'm the red boxes and Jill's the blue boxes. So a reasonable degree of recognising the same sort of material. On the left-hand piece, we see an indication that one does analysis, one discriminates between elements, one does a self-directed search, that you're going to learn to recognise narrative content and the elements of spatial organisation. There's no manual which says how you do that, but you're given the pointers to what you're going to do. On the right-hand side, we have privileging the notion of reading works of art, and that the student should also read to inform their knowledge of history as well as to inform studio work. And we have the notion of artistic ambitions and the declaring of those. And then we put that together in a spreadsheet. We had a bit of discussion together. And I, as the researcher, and Jill, as the artist, she was doing lots of words, and I was saying, no, we need to get some themes, we need to get some coding here. And we did actually eventually agree on some coding. We had some quite strong discussion about various of the points. And what I'm going to show you is the following. We're going to show you following 4 slides where we've got material from both the project briefs and from the interviews.
So the key thing that came out as a major focus in 40 to 45% of the briefs and the interviews was about the content of the project briefs, and it was about powers of invention, practical strategies, the how-to, the pointers of how-to. We found a lot of clarity about aim, but a lack of direction. This is where we're going, but we aren't going to tell you how to get there. The projects were underpinned with strategies for developing visual vocabulary, increasing a range of style and language, enabling new approaches, making the point it's not what you can do already, you need to extend yourself and create more flexibility, and not just for students coming to undergrad particularly, stick with what you learned at school. And the purpose of that is quite clearly to give the students the flexibility to move between visual languages and to choose which to adopt, and therefore underpin the development of their own sustainable personal language, and to be able to position that uniquely within the field. The projects offered ways of building a sustainable art practice through practical study and an analysis of artworks, not as art historians would do them, but in a very practical, focused way, taking notes, making drawings, looking at potential source material, retaining information, and how to move information from something that's been seen through a translation into a creative artwork. Volume and hard work are prioritized again and again and again to enable the reflective processes of learning through making. For example, one of the project briefs that we heard about in the interviews was to get students together, 30 students together, give them each a matchstick, and ask them to make 50 drawings by the end of the day, either of the matchstick or with the matchstick or in any other way. So momentum through making and volume is clearly a basis for sustainable practice and therefore feeds the creative process. But there's also, I think, the need for things to resist, as suggested earlier today. So the staff trying to put things into the project that would trip students up and give them something to work against and to work with. But all this is implied and it isn't spelt out, so we're back to Elkins, really, and his experience in the US. We also looked at the issue of field knowledge. We found that about 20% of the material in the briefs was about field knowledge. And drawing from the figure or architecture, those kinds of seen external references, was very strong. What was not strong in the briefs that we found was the self as reference or the self as subject and content. And that makes a very strong distinction with contemporary learning in fine art, which is very student-centered and therefore reflects back on the individual's capacity to pull forward their experience of life and use that to generate substance for their work. We were clear that they wanted to look. There's a good quote here from the interviews, and the second bullet point down from the interviews, how to look at other art like a mechanic looks at an engine. That's that kind of very clear, analytical way of approaching other people's artistic production in order to gain information and bring it back into the proto-artist, the student's understanding. One of the projects that was referred to in the interviews was the style project, and this was a project where Judith was doing this interview with this individual, but this teacher had set up a still life, very complex still life in the studio, and then sent students out with the directive that you would produce a set of 4 drawings over 2 weeks in different styles, and there would be 4 different styles, and they were Futurism, Cubism, Surrealism, and Impressionism. So the students obviously had to go out, research what that looked like, but then actually go through the process of adopting those styles. It was great when Judith pulled this up in the interview, because I actually did that as a student and remember it.
Anyway, so this is about being an artist. That was a very strong theme that came through both the interviews and the projects, how the community of practice operates, I'd say. Now, I must admit, I saw twice as much of this as Jill did in the project briefs, but maybe I was just a bit more looking for it, I think. And there was a very strong sense about embedded values, you know, self-discipline, self-determination, time spent making in the studio. And then we saw it also in the interviews, which I conducted, that you look at art in a particular analytic way, and that you have a responsibility to read the big books on the subject, and to have that breadth of knowledge. And there was a really strong sense of things that you do and you don't do. You don't illustrate, you don't theorize, you don't decorate. But this was, we were talking about a particular generation. It's very, very different now. Artists specify the works and they're fabricated by others. And now theory and theorizing is very much part of the intellectual justification for artworks.
One of the key things that emerged was the idea of space, the gap, the thing that wasn't said. The briefs lacked specific specifications. One of the briefs that we looked at talked about you will learn about the fundamentals of drawing, but nowhere in the brief did it point you to where those fundamentals might be articulated. It wasn't in the assessment methods, and it wasn't really on the reading list either. So students would believe they were learning the fundamentals of drawing, but not really understanding what they were. So no link between statements made in the purpose and the means of getting there. Equally, an emphasis on developing strategies, but little written down. Judith and I had a long conversation about that. Was this just how to do, or was it a strategy? Yes, I think as we worked through, they were strategies. But where was this learning happening? We're back to the black box issue. What was happening? Where was it happening? How did the student move from the establishment of a couple of set parameters through practically making the work to then coming forward with something new for them? Possibly, some of the assistance in that was about the peer group, working around the students, and then the one-to-one tutorials along the way, the life of the project, and then the big studio critique, the set piece at the end of the project, and possibly collective peer discussion of mature practitioners and proto-practitioners, bringing together a value set, and often then would talk about, does this piece of work or not? Does this piece of art work or not? That is something that is understood within the field for fine art education and fine art practice, but is very, very difficult to pin down. One interviewee spoke of a type of chamber music of a rigorous kind, but with improvisation as a big part of it, and of allowing someone to come into solo on instinct. Another recalled that after the first year project brief, students were cast adrift into second year and left to sink or swim. So perhaps too much analysis causes paralysis.
And because we're running out of time, I'm going to very quickly move over. We checked back all our findings against Amabile and had a bit of a discussion about how we were matching. I think the really interesting point is about the tolerance for ambiguity, this big space that those students work in, this lack of direction that they're actually given. And so in terms of our conclusions and the gaps, so it's the space bit, the dynamics of the community of practice are things that we really want to look at further. And I think that there's a continuing quandary about Kant. Only genius can produce great art. And properties of genius, originality, exemplarity, and lack of rational logic. And I think that is really, really so endemic in the understanding of art and artist. But on the other hand, we've got Daniel Birnbaum saying modernist art school based on the creative individual is convincing. You know, everyone is an artist. So everyone is an artist or nobody is an artist. And I was struck also again by the Sternberg Handbook of Creativity, talking about cognitive and social psychology approaches have provided valuable insights. But actually, I think this whole area about the sorts of things that we've been doing in the training of creative individuals, I think that there's scope to actually look more closely here. And I'm going to end on the really interesting point is that the people we interviewed, they don't actually recognise what they're doing as being involved with creativity. They're just doing the work that they do, the work of the artist.
Thank you very much, Jill and Judith. We have time for one question on the floor. If there are no questions, I will ask a question. I am very intrigued by the fact that discipline comes in as a very important element of artistic behavior and artistic production, which is in line with the fact that creativity is not a strange behavior, but something that can be controlled. Can you comment on that?
I mean, I think when hearing Todd's presentation, I think my explanation was, yeah, the C pluses, they know what to do next. They intuitively know how to move through the process. And a lot of what our respondents were doing as teachers were actually giving the clues and the values about what you do. A lot of them talked about the generative strategies, what to do if you got in a hole, what to do if you got stuck. And I think that came through.
Thanks again. Okay, now we move on to Christiane Kirsch. She will talk about creativity in architects. She has a master's in psychology, mediation, and working on art therapy now. And also she's a professional dancer. I'm not suggesting that is your question to her in the end, but she is. And please, the floor is yours. That is for moving your slides.
So today I'm talking about creativity in architects, but in general I'm interested in creativity in different populations, meaning like artists, scientists, but also the general population, like creativity in everyday life. So we can say that architects, they embody personality characteristics of almost all creative types simultaneously, meaning that they can be considered as artists, but also as scientists, and maybe also businessmen, because they have to sell their products. And so we looked at those personality characteristics that artists and scientists, they have simultaneously, meaning, like, for example, if you look at fluid intelligence, you see that in both disciplines it's important. And also openness to new experiences, and psychoticism. So psychoticism is a personality characteristic, meaning a tendency to psychosis. And it's characterized maybe by hostility, anger, impulsivity. And we looked also at ego strengths. So we can consider ego strengths also as emotional stability. This means it's the opposite of the continuum of neuroticism. So we see that for scientific creativity, emotional stability seems very important, whereas for artistic creativity, less. But so in this study, we have different hypotheses, so that we have a positive correlation between fluid intelligence and creativity, between openness to new experiences and creativity, between psychoticism and creativity, and between ego strengths and creativity. So the first model that you see on the top is a model of Eysenck. So he was one of the first researchers who attempted to establish a multivariate model by integrating different features to predict creative potential. So our model that you see down is very much inspired by the model of Eysenck. So we try to create an innovative model of prediction of creativity. But so this is a simplified version. It's more only the last part of the model of Eysenck. So we believe that psychoticism, so high psychoticism, influences creative personality, and that their intelligence and ego strengths become very important, to realize creative potential. So in this case, creative personality is represented mainly by openness to new experiences. So here you can see what the sample looked like, and also the instruments that we used. So the task of creative thinking drawing production for evaluating creativity in architects. I wanted to show you a picture of this task, but unfortunately it's not the last version of the presentation. I hope that some of you know what it looks like. So there are different elements who are already predefined, like for example a circle. And then you have to combine these elements together and to create something interesting or not necessarily meaningful, but something original. And normally, if you use all the different elements that are proposed and if you create something global, so that is like represents a general theme, then you get higher points on creativity. Whereas if you just use the different elements separately and you draw something that has no connection with each other, meaning that the different elements, they are not at all linked to each other, then you get normally a lower score in creativity. So we used the NEO FF5 for openness to new experiences and the MMPI2 for psychoticism and ego strength. So here to evaluate creative potential, we built different scores. So we had the factor of originality and the factor of adaptation, because both originality and adaptation are important for creativity and are integrated in the definition of creativity. So these factors, they were just built by adding different sum scores of the task of creative thinking drawing production. And then for originality, we added another score, that is statistical originality, and this represents only like the percentage of people in this sample who used a specific idea. So for example, if there is a circle and people, they draw a sun, so that is very unoriginal idea in the sense that a lot of people in this sample, they draw a sun. And then finally, creativity. The creativity score is realized by the ratings of judges. But so in this study, I couldn't yet integrate the ratings of the judges. But so it's ongoing, so we are still working on it. So here you see what came out. So we see that reasoning, meaning fluent intelligence, seems very important for originality, whereas ego strength or emotional stability seems very important for adaptation. And so the last part, you see that the explained variance is quite high, but this is only an artifact because it's not yet the real judges score that we could use for creative potential. So it will change this graph. It's just to look at preliminary results. So then we have the impression that fluid intelligence seems very important for generating a maximum of innovative ideas, whereas ego strength takes the role of selecting among these ideas those who are adapted to the context. And it could also be that ego strength here takes the role of discerning creative productions from bizarre productions. So if it's not adjusted to the context, then it could also more easily get interpreted as a bizarre production. And I think also in architecture, it's important that a building stays at least a bit adapted to the context or is useful. And this outcome seems like intuitively plausible because the definition of intelligence is also successful novelty. So meaning that a lot of researchers define intelligence as a way that people create something that is original to themselves. So it's not necessarily original for the population in general, but it's subjectively new or original. And that could also be a reason why here fluid intelligence is linked to originality. So, thank you.
Thank you very much. We have time for 2 questions. Floor. Okay, please, scenes.
More of a comment, really. That the eco strength that you related to adaptation and selection, and the low creatives in the other presentation, and not knowing where to go. If you don't have that courage of your conviction, if you don't notice what's going on, if you're not able to select because of your eco strength, the same thing happens. I just wanted to point out the similarity. It's really nice.
Yeah, I also remember like the presentation from before, they said that discipline is very important for creativity, and I think like discipline can also maybe be linked to ego strengths. So if you can control your emotions better, then it's maybe easier to stay disciplined or to have perseverance also.
Okay. Ted is introducing an engineering solution to the problem of turning on the microphone, so thank you. Any other questions from the floor, please?
Thank you. Do you find it difficult to use the same metrics or the same approach to the teaching of creativity to focus on architect versus artistic endeavors? It seems to me that an artistic endeavor, a painting, either works or it doesn't work. People like it or it doesn't like it. However, in the case of an architect, the house could fall down. And so I'm not sure that you have distinguished enough as to the difference between the end result of the profession that you're studying and the method of analyzing what goes into the creative process.
So you mean because I used a drawing test to evaluate creativity in architects and not like a building that they created?
No, what I mean is that the penalty for failure of an architect is far greater than the penalty for failure for a painter.
Yes, in some sense, but also when I was in the School of Architecture, I also realized that most of the time, like the architects, they really create something very innovative, and then it's like the engineers who have to see that it works out. So I'm not.
Yes. With this answer, we give a round of applause to Christina. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we move on to the last presentation in this session by Per Halstrøm on Topoi as a tool for exploring ideas and arguments in a design process. Per is a fiction writer. He has a background in rhetoric and argumentation, and is a PhD fellow in design at the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts. Okay, so Per, the floor is yours.
Thank you. This one. Yeah. Hello. Yeah, my name is Per Halstrøm. I'm from the Royal Danish Academy of Fine Arts School of Design. And I'm really happy to present in this old university, because at the institution where where I do my research. I'm considered the one who has his head in really ancient books, since I'm looking at Aristotle and Quintilian and Hermogenes, which is very rare in design studies. So I'm going to introduce... today I'm going to introduce you to 3 things. First, I'll introduce you to 2 distinctions in topical thinking. And then I'll give you an example of a design student's reasoning by use of topical thinking. And then in the end, if I have time before your lunch, I will introduce you to my research methodology. All right, so topics, or topoi, it stems from the Greek word topos, meaning place or location, and it's to be viewed as a metaphor in rhetoric. So it's a metaphor for it's places where you can go to discover new things or new content or new arguments, so new perspectives in a way, or new focal points. So the topical teachings themselves are to be viewed metaphorically. But however, it's a really, definitions through time have varied to a degree where it becomes almost impossible to talk about this topical teachings as a term. In Aristotle's rhetoric, there are two types of topoi. One is the specific topoi, and the other is are general. And the specific are usually like heuristics. They are lists of places where you mentally can move your mind in order to find content or matter. And the others are general, and these can be used for almost any matter, like the topos, the more or the less. So if I am to argue something, I can almost always use an argument that, well, we should do this because it gives us more productivity or something like that. So it's a type of argumentation that applies to most cases. However, as Grimaldi and Gabrielsen later have pointed out, the distinctions between topoi are not necessarily important. It's not necessarily important to distinct by thinking about them as being more or less specific, but by how they are used. And that's why they also become relevant to design thinking. So the specific topoi deal with matter and content. And in a way, they can be thought of as themes. So under what theme or under what categorization should we consider something? So for instance, the September 11th, George Bush emphasized that it was an act of war when the planes hit World Trade Center. And then if we use that topos, then the reasoning afterwards will be affected by how the ground was established. Whereas we could have said that it was a crime or it was an act of insanity, and then the reasoning afterwards would have become very different. Also, a great example from Martin Cooper was that whereas the phone could be thought of as something where you call a place, then the topos was place for this. But then it became, in your invention, it became something that calls a person, and then the topos is person. So it changes topoi. And then the general topoi deal with an argument and how it infers in a debate. So it's actually quite different, since it's the way the argument is structured. So it's how do you infer, do you use an argument of quality versus quantity or something like that? So how does that work if we apply these topical teachings to design thinking? That's what I'm going to explore today. Whereas the specific are concerned with how to determine or understand a problem or a situation, they represent a systematic way of considering all aspects of the problem. I'm not saying that my students necessarily can consider all aspects of a problem. However, by using these heuristics, they can cover more aspects than they would just by intuition. And the general are concerned with motive inference, as I said. So the general would sound something like this, that is when the design student is in the beginning of a process, they can ask themselves, is this a quality over quantity topos that I'm dealing with in this general thinking? Am I bringing friends, lovers closer to each other by inventing this design? If I present a couch to them, will they become closer and have more quality time together? Or am I using an analogy topos? Am I going to make people feel comfort in their home environment, just like they feel when they're in a beautiful part of nature? Then you use analogy, since it works in nature, it might also work in the home environment. And the third one would be contrast topos. Aristotle is full of lists. There are I think he has 28 different general topoi. So I won't go in, as due to time limits, I won't go into all 28 of them. This is the next thing I'll present is a design student. She's called Eleanor, and she's part of a group of students that I work with. And I'll introduce you to how she looked at the problem, or looked at the design problem by using a topical thinking invented by Hermogenes. It's called ergasia. It means working up of an argument. If some Greeks are here, you might feel free to correct me. So Hermogenes has these two schemes or two heuristics where if you are to consider a problem, then you can think of it as is the problem in place, in time, in way, person, cause, act. And these would be, from where I see it, these would sound something like Aristotle's specific topoi. But this is not, Hermogenes is not aware of that in his writings. It's what I'm sort of applying to his thinking. And the others would be inferential ways of arguing. So, Eleanor, she was interested in exploring the general topos. She wanted to bring people closer together by inviting private, intimate conversations, or to create a space for inward contemplation. And at first, she wanted to make a sofa for a children's room, which may seem odd now that we know the general topoi, but at the time, she was really interested in that. However, she thought that, do children need a specific place for inward contemplation in their own rooms? And perhaps this might be too fragile, the sofa I'm thinking of creating. Then her supervisor said that, well, young single women, they have a lot of money. Maybe you should create something for them. And that really puzzled her because it sounded like a good idea. However, it didn't really fit with the general topoi. Because usually young single women in their homes want a sofa that is more multifunctional. They don't need a place which is specifically just for inward contemplation. So in the home we want more things. These are Eleanor's thoughts. Please, yeah, not trying to be categorizing too much. So her third thought was that she wanted to make a sofa for a public space, like a waiting room. And then she saw that, this general topos that she invented fits in libraries, lobbies, and perhaps a psychologist's waiting room. So now she knows the type of rooms that she's creating something for. And then she can start using Hermogenes' circumstance topoi. So she considers the place topos, and she considers the problem. What is the problem in these places? Well, if we don't feel comfortable and private in these rooms, for instance, in the library, then we do not want to stay there. We don't want to think, read, or contemplate in these rooms. So she makes the materials should be inviting, the colors should be playful, the traditional techniques she used, they create a space which invite users to sit and touch and let their minds wander. So that's a discovery created by thinking about the topos place. The next topos is time. So in much design and technology, nowadays, we don't recognize the materials we touch. I have not thought for 1 second about what this material might be. And this, in Eleanor's opinion, creates a longing for traditional crafts such as embroidery and wicker. So this problem is discovered just by thinking about, in this time, topos. But she also thought of time in a completely different way. These are they're moldable. These topoi. So time in these places might feel too long. If we're in a psychologist's waiting room, waiting for 10 minutes might feel like forever. However, she wants to make something that makes it feel like a very short time, or make people forget time, and make people just stay there, feel like they want to stay there. So she creates like a thick mattress, for instance, which makes people rest and feel comfortable, to make them just want to stay there. The act, topos. Oh. Well, when having intimate conversations, it's from Eleanor. It can be difficult to know where to put your hands or where to look. Yeah, that's a common problem when you're having intimate conversations. I can see that. So it wasn't intentional. Sorry. It might feel too intimate if you're sitting there staring at each other. That was the thought behind this. So she made a sofa that sort of gives subtle, or creates these subtle distractions to the persons in the sofa. And also, when you're contemplating or reading, one needs to be able to move freely and feel comfortable, and this is provided again by the thick mattress. So all these choices and all this reasoning about how to choose is actually sort of sparkled by thinking in the way Aristotle described, or in the way Hermogenes described, this topical state of mind. I'll skip through the rest of them, but it's just skip to conclusion. The big question, of course, is does it make better products? Having this topical state of mind, or having these topical teachings introduced in design schools? I don't know, and actually I don't even care, because because that's not the aim of my research. It's just the question that comes to mind, obviously, when I present. Because the aim is to teach designers to reason about and find arguments for their choices. So there was in the end, I'd like to go back to where we started this morning. That it's about creativity was defined as generation of new ideas that impact the world, and what topical teachings can do is it can help design students reason about how to impact the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one question. Please, Vint.
Actually, what I find very interesting about this talk is that we were trying to get into the mind of a designer. I'm now wishing that every designer would make a little card to go along with either the painting or the sofa or whatever they made, saying what were they thinking at the time when they designed it.
Yeah, me too. That's what most of my methodological questions. Sorry. It's a strange one, this one. But yeah, I agree. Yes, please.
That's the lovely thing about it, that you're pushing and you're getting down to the sort of core issues and examining the context of the work. Yeah. And that's the lovely thing about this, that it actually could go beyond the sofa.
Yeah, I'm really happy that you point this out, because it's thank you. I totally agree. Hopefully that will be the outcome. Sorry?
You can entitle your talk Beyond the Sofa.
Yeah.
Very good.
Thank you. Okay, well, please join me to give them a round of applause again. To conclude the session, I would like to ask Ted Rappaport to give his closing remarks. Maybe Akansha, if you want.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, for the engineers and scientists in the room, I don't know if you feel like I do, but that was a wonderful respite and very different from how engineers see things and deal with things in a lecture format. It was quite exciting. I'll just summarize what I saw, and Akansha, feel free to jump in, but quite remarkable. Todd Lubart talked about ideas, the incubation to illumination to verification, and he mentioned there's a mental model. When designers are creative, they have openness. They need openness, and they have to be open to their dreams, and they have to have extremely strong self-criticism, emotional strength, and strong personality, which I think engineers who are creative also share those traits. The big question was, how do you evaluate the art students who are C- or C+? Because maybe one of the C- students had the personality and the ability to change the minds of the judges, which is where great breakthroughs often happen. But connecting the substates of the steps to thinking and organizing ideas was fascinating, I thought. And the feedback loops and the processes taken, how the stronger students first got the documentation and kind of chewed around the idea before they dove in. And the ones who just started experimenting and quickly were stressed out without doubts, without much planning, seemed to do poorer. And then the study showed, Todd showed that the high creativity engineers have a strong realization, association, and illumination in the end of the project. So these traits look to be common amongst artists, designers, and engineers. Jill and Judy talked about fine art education. And a remarkable statement, I thought, was that contemporary creativity literature is missing in art school. So the students don't really learn about contemporary creativity, yet that's what they're attempting to do. And in engineering, you often build on the shoulders of giants and really build on a base. Yet the key traits of ambition, intuition, and organization were key to the artists that are great. And yet, why art cannot be taught was a theme. So you wonder why there's art school if art cannot be taught. But they went on to show practical strategies, which are volume of work, hard work, learning from making. Tinkerers, the engineers, the Silicon Valley, the internet, great artists all share that. Discipline and self-determination. These are common traits. And knowing the past, the artists do read the big book of the great masters. So they do learn on the shoulders of giants. But I thought the greatest line was when Judy ended with genius. Genius, the original thinkers, you know it when you see it. And that's really what makes an artist. You know it when you see it. And how you get there is, I think, still a gap. But if you look at Bob Kahn and Vince Cerf and the internet, they had this playground to innovate. They were able to think and foster their creativity with DARPA and the internet and research. And Akansha mentioned how she finds relating to her life and being able to pursue her passion in a creative environment lets you develop the discipline and self-determination. That seemed to come through for the art studies that you mentioned as well. Christiana Kirsch talked about creativity in architecture. And what I thought was wonderful is she talked about the openness and the conscientiousness. These are common traits needed to be successful in architecture. And also you have to be psychotic. I thought that was really a revelation. There's a healthy dose of psychosis for a very creative and successful engineers and architects. And you know, she's right. Andy Grove, the chairman of Intel, wrote a book, Only the Paranoid Survive. So this happens in engineering as well. She mentioned ego, strength, and intelligence, and I think if you sat in one of our Marconi Society board meetings, you'd see that these inventors of great things have a very healthy ego and a very strong intelligence. But you know, what she said at the end was, she introduced the end when someone asked a question, and I thought it was just so brilliant, when she said, yeah, the architect comes up with great things, but then it's on the engineer to build. What she was really pointing out to all of us is how interconnected we have to be, and to make the great breakthrough, you really have to tie things in together. And there's a great book, Walter Isaacson wrote a book about Steve Jobs, and if you read that book, you will see an artist and an engineer and a designer discussed, and the passion and all these topics that Christian and Judy and Jill talked about are in that. And then finally, Per Halstrøm gave a talk. I really don't know what he said, but it sounded very, very nice. Actually, I'm being facetious somewhat, but you know, that's kind of, an engineer would have trouble with that talk, but I saw a lot of people really got it. I did hear him argue something that, you can argue something that gives us more productivity, and there's themes and topics, topos, topi, that deal with general versus specific. One thing I took out of that was that young single women have a lot of money, and that was news to me, and so that's a valuable data point. But to be quite fair, he did give a fascinating look at an individual designer and the process she took to be able to come up with a result. But at the end, my engineering side got puzzled again, because he said there are two distinctive ways to establish the design. He doesn't know which is best, and he doesn't really care. And that's where the engineer comes into play, and they want to make it work. So I think we're getting somewhere with this. We see there's a lot of common traits. A lot is passion, a lot is personality, a lot is ego, but it's hard work and determination and self-confidence to push the end of the envelope. So thanks to all the speakers for this very interesting session.
That was a wonderful summary, Ted. I would have little to add, but I'll tie back to my initial questions. I don't think we are going to add ego strength to our machines anytime soon, so that's not happening. Coming back to the question of how to train the next generation of engineers, we do have a session in the evening that speakers will add more insights. But from this session, I think, from Todd's remarks, it's important to be able to guide the students when they get puzzled, maybe, or figure out which students are very quick in getting the feedback loops figured out or plan in the beginning. So I think when we give problems to students, it would be interesting if we can track how they are progressing through the problem and intervene at the right points. And this relates very well to the second talk that Jill gave about somehow giving a problem to the students which is more open-ended. In engineering classrooms, we often give them questions which have one right answer, especially when we teach mathematical equations. But giving them open-ended design problems which have less specification gets them to tinker with things. So it would be much more interesting and probably would add more creativity. And it would also introduce something very important that she mentioned about being tolerant to ambiguity, or the idea of space. And the third point that I wanted to bring up was that the question of confidence, being able to defend their ideas, this is something that we need to promote much more in the classrooms, because in the current model, we have teachers say this answer is right or wrong, but just being able to defend the design that I've created, it needs to be much more important. And finally, to the last talk, I think just looking at different perspective, or design from different perspectives is something that students need to look at much more, instead of just one linear way of thinking of this is how things have been designed in the past and this is how they should be designed. So I think that would summarize the question of how we can train next generation of engineers properly. Thank you.
Okay, so it's time to sum up. I just want to say that Ted and I were doodling with paper, but she's writing on an iPad, so we're showing our age. Yeah, I'm sure. We will start back at 2 o'clock sharp, so we'll cut a little bit the lunchtime. I just want to say a service information for the speakers in the next session to please come up and upload your presentation now and give me your CV notes that so we get prepared. So please have lunch and rest and keep talking about the topics. Thank you very much.